Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Joe. I'm an alcoholic. Only in Los Angeles, right? Yeah. It's good to be here. I'm from Santa Monica. My home group is, I often wonder whether I should tell my home group sometimes when I go different places, but my home group meets at the corner of 2nd and Hill on Tuesday nights at 7:30. It's called As Outlined in the Book. We're a group that tries to do what's outlined in the book, and in doing that, for the last 7 or 8 years, we tend to get a lot of flack in Alcoholics Anonymous for wanting to do what's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Personally, that doesn't matter to me because I go all over the country, and some people want to hear about it and some people don't. And I'm way past wanting to make friends and influence people in Alcoholics Anonymous who have found everything they ever wanted in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I didn't. That does not mean, and please don't think anything I have to say tonight reflects on that I don't like or love in the bottom of my heart with every fiber of my being the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here tonight. But at 5.5 months in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1982 in Denver, Colorado, I hit a place after going to meetings and being sober longer than I'd ever been in 18 years, which was the absolutely best, worst day of my life. And only an alcoholic would understand that a day like that could be terrible and wonderful. It was terrible because it didn't feel good, and I had the kind of mind that thinks if it doesn't feel good, it's not good, and if it feels good, it is good. And I had to get past that a long time ago in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I had that kind of black and white mind. And I used to say things in AA like, if it's God's will, it feels good. Until I looked at what I had done for 18 years, and a lot of it felt really good, and I know in my heart it wasn't God's will. And then I started to do some things in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I absolutely know in my heart are God's will, that don't feel good all the time. So I would suggest the next time any of you hear someone say that if it's God's will, it feels good, ask them if they've ever written inventory or made amends in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because they probably haven't. Those actions don't always feel great, but where you come to on the other side has always been a wonderful place. So at 5.5 months in this program, going to lots of meetings with commitments, I hit a place that probably every other time I should have drank. I love the chip people, because in that I see myself. This is not to ridicule or anything or share anything with you I don't see in myself and that I haven't experienced. What I'd like to talk about tonight is not theory, and it's not what I've learned in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's what I've experienced. And at 90 days, I too thought I had become totally without self-will. until I was about 95 days. At 6 months, I thought I had a conscious contact with God, and at 6.5 months, I found out it was just because I had ideas in my head. At a year, I thought I had kept myself sober, and in about 1.5 years, I realized that I had not kept myself sober, and it had been by the grace of God, and that you all had just let me take the credit for a year, just long enough to find out what it was, and kept me busy long enough doing things that I could say I was doing to keep me sober, to find out that it was none of the great things I was doing that were keeping me sober, that it was but for the grace of God that I was sober, and that it was a free, undeserved, unearned gift. Now in that there's great freedom, when one realizes from their head to their heart that what they're doing is not what keeps them sober. Because you then begin to seek that which keeps you sober. I'm not ashamed at 12 years to say I believe in God. And I'm not ashamed at 12 years to tell you that I drank alcohol. I've been places where neither one are to be discussed. Not to mention anywhere in particular, because it could be anywhere USA. They don't want to hear about God, and they don't want to hear about booze. And I don't know what else there is in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because they're the only two powers that I've ever had in my life that ever did anything. And I'm either headed toward one or the other at any given moment. The trick is, I need people like you to remind me which one I'm headed for on a regular basis. Because with great motives, feeling great, I can be headed so close to a drink, thinking that it's God. See, I get the two mixed up sometimes because they're a lot alike. They're a lot alike. Except I've bet my life for the last 12 years on a daily basis, reaffirmed by the prayers that I use, that God will have more power than booze. But I got to tell you, for 18 years, booze had more power than God. And for a long time in Alcoholics Anonymous, and from time to time, and I'm sure it'll happen again, I have fallen into a form of denial where I began to think that I had more power than booze. And it's a form of denial that I don't hear talked about that much. Of course, the kind of denial we talk about a lot, everybody knows about. And we do talk about it a lot. That old, the only disease that tells you you don't have one. To deny that very disease that you have, the disease of alcohol, to deny that is a form of denial we all do talk about. You seem to hear a lot about it when you're new. But at 7.5 years, I woke up one day writing inventory. And off the end of my pen came a realization that had nothing to do with what I was writing. And I saw from that awareness that I was suffering from a form of denial that was stronger than the denial I came here with. But I was 7.5 years away from a drink. And it happened before 7.5 years, and I'm sure it'll happen again. And it's a form of denial that comes out in me sometimes very subtle. I'll get up to take a birthday cake, 5, 10, 12 years sober, and somebody in the back of the room will go, "How did you do it?" Sounds normal. We hear it all the time. How did you do it? I don't really think anything when someone says that, except I begin to proceed to tell you that my name's Joe and I'm an alcoholic, and that means I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable, and then I tell you for 10 or 15 minutes how I keep myself sober and manage my life. And I proceed to fall into the thing that you've just asked me to answer of how I do it, capital I, unquote. Right? Sometimes it's not so subtle. Sometimes it's just me taking the credit for what I've been given in the denial of the grace of God. Because see, if I'm 7.5 years sober, or 23.5 years sober, or 45 years sober, and I think this is now something that I've earned, One of the birthday people mentioned it. I've earned this place. Well, then it's about justice. And we're dealing with a God that gives you what you've earned and what you deserve. I remember the first time I went to my sponsor when I was new in my first 90 days, and it was either something really good had happened or something really bad had happened. And when you're new, it doesn't really matter. But I went to him and I said, Don, I said, I really don't feel like I deserve this. He said, thank God. He said, thank God we're not sitting in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous where people get what they deserve, or they'd be empty rooms. He said, I don't think we're dealing with a God of justice. I think we're dealing with a God of mercy and grace. He said, you know what grace is? I had absolutely no idea, and I was experiencing it. See, my mind, my ego cannot believe that I can be experiencing something that I don't understand, because I think my mind is the beginning and the end of all understanding, the Alpha and the Omega. And I couldn't possibly be suffering from something or experiencing something wonderful that I'm not aware of until I find out I am. And I found out after a few days past 30 days, because I'd never had 30 days in 18 years. I found out that I was experiencing the grace of God, and that I had been given an undeserved and an unearned gift. Now, I've had to do a lot of work since then to remember that. We all have our own jokes on us that God plays, and we all have our own paradoxes. And there are spiritual paradoxes in our program that work for all of us. My paradox, one of the jokes on me, is I've had to do a lot of work in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to find out it's none of the great work I've done in Alcoholics Anonymous. I drank for 18 years. And I don't think the length of time that I drank has anything to do with why I say to you who maybe drank longer or shorter, why I'm alcoholic. I went to 10 treatment centers. Has nothing to do with why I say to you I'm an alcoholic. I came from a wealthy family. My grandfather was vice president of Post Cereal, invented Post Toasties, and I was given everything I ever wanted. I was spoiled rotten, and I don't think that has anything to do with why I'm alcoholic. And at 19, I was put in the Michigan State Penitentiary like a cage, like an animal, for several years. Because I thought it was okay to write $25,000 worth of checks on someone else's account. The state of Michigan happened to call it forgery. And Daddy wasn't getting me out of it. And I don't think that has anything to do with why I say to you I'm alcoholic. But I used to have this great attachment to my drunkalogue. And I'm sure there's some of you in the room that know about AA screwing up your drinking, like trying to drink with a head full of AA. I wonder if anyone in the room can relate to somebody in AA screwing up your drunkalogue. I'll tell you how a man did that. Because I loved my drunkalogue. Because I thought it was what joined me to you. I found out my drunkalogue is usually what separates me from you. But that's par for the course. I've been doing everything I can for the last 35 years. Last 30 years before I got here. I've been doing everything I can to separate myself from you by either being better or worse. Now I come into the program and I think that's just going to end, or that I can stop that. I'm amazed at the number of people, including myself, in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that think they can defeat their own ego or cause a surrender or manage their life and keep themselves sober. It's amazing how I can believe that. So in my first 90 days, I went to more than 90 meetings because they said go to one a day, and if one's good, then 3 or 4 is better. That's just the way I am. And I think somewhere around there, I know that it was before I was 5 months and hit that bottom, that terribly wonderful day. I came down from a meeting at 1311 York Street, an AA club in Denver. I came down from a meeting upstairs, and this scary guy over by the coffee pot waved for me to come over. Scary guy. He's a ex-sheep herder and a lawyer, which is a dangerous combination. And he called me over to have a cup of coffee, and we sat at this table, and he said a very interesting question that I don't hear asked that much anymore, and I'm as guilty as anybody else of not asking it that much anymore unless you ask me for help. He said, why do you think you're alcoholic? And thank God he wasn't one of these people that believe if you're in the room, you're in the right place. Matter of fact, he even said to me, I said, well, I was up in the meeting. I'm going to meetings. He said, let me tell you something, son. I'm not one of those people that believe you're in the room, you're in the right place, and nothing happens by mistake. Because those people don't want to spend time with newcomers anymore who have that look that you have in your eye, like, what's wrong with me? He said, those people need to be talked to. And I'll tell you what, from my own experience, not only that night, but since. You know how I know that some of the people in these rooms are not in the right place? I'm in love with one. The only Al-Anon here tonight that raised their hand. They referred to her as the Al-Anon, right? Which she probably loves, right? She came to our group 8.5 years in this program. And I'll tell you what's great about being in a relationship with an Al-Anon. We love the same person. We both love the same person, right? Sometimes we both love the same person just a little too much, right? She came to our group in Santa Monica with 8.5 years in this program, wondering why, after 8.5 years, she'd never sponsored anybody. I believe that was grace. She wondered why she was doing everything in AA but AA. That's not hard to do nowadays. You all know about doing that. She wondered why after 8.5 years she didn't have that connection to the AA like some of us have, like, you know, like this is where I belong. She didn't have that. But there was a woman there in that group that has what she wants. And they sat down and they started going through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know what she found out? She's not alcoholic. She's a full-blown Al-Anon from daddy through every boyfriend she's ever had. You listen to her talk about being with one of us. I mean, it's totally insane, but she talks about what it's like to be with one of us, and her eyes light up and her blood starts flowing, and she talks about being with one of us like we talk about drinking. Our group has helped several people who are wondering after 5 years, 7 years, 6 months, all kinds of time. We've helped lots of people find out they're not in the right place and where they belong, and they've thanked us. And when you hear Nancy talk about finding out she's not, it sounds like me finding out I am, because they're both the same experience. They're an experience of finding truth. And I believe if you belong to a group that hasn't helped anybody find out that they don't belong here and they're not alcoholic in a while, you're probably not doing your job, because a lot of non-alcoholics end up here. They can drink 2 drinks. They can stop with a good reason. They're described in our book. And that's what that man sat and talked with me about that night when he screwed up my drunk-a-log. Because he said, why do you think you're alcoholic? You know what I said? I said, well, I've been to treatment 10 times. You know what he said? He said, you know what? There's people that have been to treatment more than 10 times that are about as much alcoholic as the man in the moon. And you know what he said? Some of us have never been to treatment. What does that mean? We're not? And I was using something that separates me from a lot of you to tell you why I was one of you. He said, you know there's people that can drink tremendous amounts of booze and get in trouble and have a habit for alcohol badly enough to gradually impair them physically and mentally. It might even kill them before they should die. That all they need is a sufficient reason they can stop. They're not powerless over alcohol. I didn't know he was describing a man described in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know that. He was describing what's called a hard drinker. So he said, he kind of tore that lie apart. I said, well, alcohol put me in the Michigan State Penitentiary. He said, wait just a second. He said, what did they put you in the Michigan State Penitentiary for? I said, writing bad checks. He said, then writing bad checks put you in the Michigan State Penitentiary. And he said, you know what? There's people in every penitentiary and everywhere in the world who can drink tremendous amounts of booze and get in trouble behind booze that are about as much alcoholic as the man in the moon. And you know what he said? Some of us have never been to the penitentiary. What does that mean? We're not. And he talked to me about two things that I can talk about. But he screwed up my drunkalogue to the point where the drama of where my drinking took me is of no interest to me anymore. Because the drama of where my drinking took me is not why I'm alcoholic. I have been able to sit in my living room not too long ago with a 70-year-old little black woman from South Central Los Angeles who's not even the same color, not even the same sex, never went to treatment, never went to jail, never lost a husband, never had a 502, barely ever got in trouble. And she and I were able to talk about the two things this man talked to me about, and within 20 minutes she and I knew we were the same. And that she needed Alcoholics Anonymous just as much as I do. And I have all that drama. And I am so aware of how much I used for 30 years to separate me from you, which is the function of my ego. See, I understand it doesn't mean I can overcome it, but I understand I have an ego that wants me back on a bar stool, unable to move. Guy said he drank after several years because he wanted to. That's not powerless. I know the people in this room that drank after several years when they didn't want to. Who lose choice, who have no choice, who have no more choice today about staying sober than they did to not stay sober when they had to drink. Those are the people I understand. I heard a guy say one time he's alcoholic because every time he drinks he gets drunk. I thought, my God, it's still going good for you, isn't it? It's still going the way you want it to go, right? If every time I drank I got drunk and that's what I wanted it to do, I'm not powerless. Because you know what? I know people in this room that had those times they wanted to get drunk and you couldn't. Remember drinking back to sober? Remember drinking and it just gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and you're right back to sober and you can't get drunk anymore? How about the times you really wanted to drink a lot because you were with the right gals or the right guys and you couldn't because two put you flat on your face because your tolerance was all messed up? I'm here to tell you, if August 17th, 1982, I was getting drunk every time I drank, I wouldn't need Alcoholics Anonymous. If I could go out and drink 2 beers and come back the next day to you people and say, oh, I drank a couple beers and I feel bad, how am I powerless over alcohol? This man explained to me that he's powerless over alcohol because when he puts some in his system, his body physically craves more beyond choice or want or need or what's right, necessary, or called for. And he took me back to times in my drinking where that would happen. Does that mean that happened every single time I ever drank? We have periodic drinkers in this room. The question is, were you in charge of the times it would happen and when it wouldn't? And if you weren't in charge of when it would happen or when it wouldn't, then you're powerless. Then he talked to me about the scariest part because it's the thing that separates me from those in this room that can keep themselves sober. He talked to me about what happens when there's none in your system at all that makes you powerless. You see, they don't say in More About Alcoholism that none of us like admitting we're bodily and mentally different for just the fun of it. They say it because none of us like admitting that we're bodily and mentally different from our fellows. So how am I bodily? I'm bodily different because my body craves booze. And those of you in this room that are alcoholic understand what it's like to have to drink. Beyond choice. Beyond what you want to do. Beyond the day of your father's funeral when your mother begs you not to show up drunk and you go across the street thinking you can have 2 beers just to take the edge off because they've brought you from a little white room in a sanitarium, and you have those 2 beers and you have no more choice of showing up drunk than the man in the moon. You have to. You have to show up drunk.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
Choice isn't even a word that one of us should use at those times when that craving happens. I thought I had it licked when he gave me that information, and I found out he told me that with that information it was going to do me no good to keep myself sober. People say you can't remember your last drunk, you probably haven't had it. Like remembering your last drunk is going to keep you from it. There's people in this room that can't remember the last 3 months of their drinking. They're in big trouble. My book says the day will come where remembering it will be so hazy I will not be able to bring to my mind with sufficient force the memory and the suffering of even a week ago, let alone 12 years ago. It sounds like hard stuff. I don't like hearing it any more than anyone else. But it's my truth. This is my truth. Because I walked out of the Michigan State Penitentiary 21 years sober with every reason in the world not to drink, and none in my system I commit the most insane act of my life. And I used to think alcoholic insanity. I came down from a meeting at York Street another night, and another guy calls me over to have coffee. I'm now real careful when I go to that club in Denver and someone calls me over to have coffee, because they're going to smash something that I walked in believing was true. He says, what was the topic upstairs at the meeting? I said, alcoholic insanity. He said, oh yeah? He said, what were they talking about? I said, they were talking about all the crazy stuff you and I do under the influence. He said, do you think that's alcoholic insanity? You know, all that crazy stuff we do when we're drunk. I said, yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. He said, do you think that's what our big book means when they say alcoholic insanity? I said, yeah. He said, what if I bet you $10,000 the most insane thing you ever did was with no alcohol in your system, at your very best, further away from alcohol than you'd been in a long time? I said, that's interesting. He said, make a list of the 10 craziest things you ever did. And I made that list. You know what he did for me that night? He brought me out from behind the bottle. You know that old great excuse we used to have? Some of you might understand this. I would rather make amends for armed robbery that I committed drunk than a lie that I told 10 years sober. Because you know why? I can't say, I was drunk, honey. I got to say to you that I was 10 years sober, further away from my last drink than I've ever dreamed of being. And I told you a little stupid lie about such and such and such. I would rather make amends for an armed robbery than do that. So I make this list. Armed robbery, drunk. Stuck a gun in her face, drunk, drunk, drunk. Every one of them were drunk. This guy shook his head. He said, what if I could show you the number one, not number 5, not number 8, the most insane thing that you ever did was absolutely stone cold sober with nothing in your system. And he pulled me out from behind alcohol, because you know what I saw that night? The most insane thing this guy right here that has ever done is to pick up the first drink. 28 days out of the Michigan State Penitentiary with every sufficient reason in the world not to. Having walked out of my PO's office, here's how it went. I made my first report to my parole officer the day I got out. Unfortunately, they gave me, in Michigan, unfortunately, they gave me the senior parole officer for the entire state of Michigan. That wasn't good news. I made my first report. He told me how well the picture looked for me. Job lined up, families behind you, oh my God. Remember how that used to feel when the family would rise up behind you one more time and you felt like saying to them, please don't. I'm just going to break your heart again. But you couldn't even have the guts to say that. He said, your family's behind you, you got a little girlfriend, she's waited for you. Got a little car, got a little job. Here's your conditions of your parole. No ex-felons, no bars, no drugs, can't leave the county, can't drink alcohol. You might as well just cut my jugular if I can't do those things. You might as well have just taken me back behind the walls, because that's what they said they would do if I broke that parole. And for 28 days, I'm feeling great. Doing great. Got a little money, got a little girlfriend, got a little job. Got a plan. 28 days, I go into his office for my second report, and I walk out of his office with a strange idea. I needed a pack of cigarettes. Into a bar, picked up a drink, called the next felon, drove out of the county, woke up 5 days later in a dope house 125 miles away. Had broken every condition of my parole. And I didn't choose to do that. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't need to do that, and it wasn't necessarily or right or what was needed. Because, see, those things don't have anything to do with that day happening further away from my last drink than I'd been in a long time. See, I drank alcohol and used drugs every single day I was in the Michigan State Penitentiary. Every single day without exception. I either drank or used drugs or both. Good drugs in penitentiaries. Why would you waste any time smuggling in junk, right? You know who you get them from? The guards. Or family. Or friends. The place I was a camp. It was so loose my mother used to bring jugs of vodka and orange juice on the visits. And that's not why I'm alcoholic. You come here and you hear a lot about the yets, but you don't hear a lot about the if-onlys. And I'm no more unique or special or better than anybody in this room, and I can't be, because I'm alcoholic. And if I had the if-onlys going on, someone else in this room must understand the if-onlys. The yets we all know about. You know, I haven't done that yet. I haven't done that yet. But what about the if-onlys? My if-only story went like this when I was new. If only I hadn't gone there. If only he hadn't been 57 when I was born. See, my dad was 57 when I was born. That used to cause me great pain. It now gives me great hope. Because I'd like to be doing what my dad was doing when I'm 57 years old, right? And I was sitting in a meeting one day and a guy told my little if-only story, and he turned out just as sick as I did, and the lie got smashed. Because he had it just the way I thought it would have to have been for me to not turn out the way I did. And how I don't think I can turn out the way I did has to do with them doing it to me. Because you see, when I'm new in AA, I'm a victim of them doing it to me. And when I've been around AA for a while, when I'm separate from God, I'm a victim. I'm either taking the credit or I'm placing the blame. I'm like the guy who's been sober forever, and God forbid he's on his deathbed, God forbid. And his wife is right there, and he looks up at his wife and he says, honey, after all these years I've realized something. She says, what's that? He says, well, you were there when I got shot, and you stood by me. And you were there when I lost all our money. You were right there, and you stood by me. And you were right there when I had my stroke, and you stood by me. And you've always been right there, and you've always stood by me. And after all these years, I've realized one thing. She says, what's that? He says, you're a friggin' jinx. That's how I think. That's how I think. A couple years ago, I was engaged to be married. And she left me. And for a couple days, see, that was the truth. And if you would have asked me, if you would have come up at a meeting and said, you look like you're hurting, or you sound like you're angry, Why are you hurting? I would have said, because she left me. And you see, that's the truth. And whatever I believe and whatever anybody in this room currently believes is the truth until you find out it either is or it isn't. Whether it makes any rational sense at all or has anything to do with reality, whatever I believe to be true is, until it either is or it isn't. And for those few days, if you would have asked me, why are you angry, why are you hurt, why are you in pain, I would have said, because she left me. And that's the truth that I would rather drink again for than find out anything else. That's the truth that takes the power of God to pry me away from, and the power of this program. A friend of mine from my home group comes up to me and he says, this is a guy that cares more about me than how I might feel about what he has to say. And that's a place one can be taken in AA. But for a long time, I have to tell you, I cared more about what you thought I was going to say and how you would feel about it than truth, than you. Because I cared only about me and how you were going to feel about me. But this guy cares more about me than how I might feel about what he has to say. And he comes up to me and he says, why don't you go home? And he says it with love. With love. Without love, it's cruel. He says, why don't you go home and write inventory about her leaving you? And I go home and I open this book and it reminds me to put who. I'm talking about inventory the way it is in the big book. Not some weird autobiography where you write about how you felt when she left, because all you'll get to is how you felt when she left. But it asked me to put who and what. It asked me to put who and why I'm angry. And I put on that paper what I think is the truth. I'm angry at her because she left me. That's the truth. Then I'm given the grace of God to see where 6 or 7 different areas of self were either hurt, threatened, or interfered with when she left me. Because you see, when she left me, it hurt my self-esteem. And my pride, and my ambition, and my security, and my personal relations, and my sex relations, and my pocketbook. Not for the reasons I think, though. I would think that when she left me, it hurt my self-esteem because I'm a rotten piece of you-know-what who doesn't deserve her anyway. But if that's really how I felt as she was leaving, I would have just sat there and I would have gone, I don't really deserve you anyway, honey, because I'm a rotten piece of you-know-what. I can't even imitate someone with low self-esteem anymore. Because you know what my problem was? Not that I've never had low self-esteem. But when I'm angry, it's not because of low self-esteem. When she left and it affected my self-esteem, is because I got a little too much self-esteem and I start to believe no one should leave me no matter what I do, and I'm above being left by anybody. Or I wouldn't have gotten mad. And off the end of my pen comes the lies about these beliefs that my ego tries to tell me are true. The biggest lie of all came off the end of my pen for security, because my ego tried to tell me I need her to stay to be okay. You know that stuff in the middle of the night your ego tells you you'll die if you lose? It's never God. It's always, if I lose that job, I'll no longer exist. If I lose that money, I'll die. And off the end of my pen came, I need her to stay to exist. Biggest lie of all. My ego wants me dependent on anything other than God. Then, I don't know how, but I'm given the grace to see where my selfishness and my self-seeking and my dishonesty and my fear and how I did each of those with her with explanations drove her away. And all of a sudden the truth that she left me turned into a lie, and the lie that I had anything to do with it turned into the truth. And my perception shifted. And she didn't need to come back or see the light or beg forgiveness or admit she was wrong for me to get free. All I had to do was see that I had driven her away. I had to see my part, my responsibility, and see that my troubles with her leaving were of my own making, and then admit it to some other alcoholic and to God and myself, and then ask for the stuff that's at the root of all that to be removed from a God that I'm not even sure can do that at that point in consciousness. And then put her name on a 3x5 card and all the harm that I'm aware of. And then I sat at my home group and I had the audacity to say, I'm praying for the willingness to make amends. And a guy who cares more about me than how I might feel about what he has to say raises his hand, because you see, in our home group, we're allowed to ask questions. And in my home group, if they start a question with, is it possible, you might as well just get right under your chair because you're in big trouble. And this little black Crip member, ex-gang member that I used to sponsor, how dare someone I used to sponsor raise their hand and ask me a question. He raises his hand and he said, is it possible you're not praying for the willingness to make that amends, and you'll know the exact moment you're willing? And in my pious way, I said, that's possible. But inside, you know what I wanted to say? How, you little bastard, how dare you talk to me that way? Right? I said, maybe that's possible. How will I know the exact moment I'm willing? He said, the exact moment you're willing to make that amends, you'll hear a really strange noise. I thought, what? I've never heard anything like that. He said, the exact moment you're willing to make that amends, you'll hear a really strange noise. I said, like what? He said, like this. And you know what? The exact moment I was willing to make that amends, I heard a really strange noise. Me knocking on her door. A couple minutes later, I heard another really strange noise. Out of my mouth came, I need to talk to you about the harm I caused you. Oh, I'd love to have a sponsor that says all I need to do is go back to those people and tell them how I felt when they did whatever they did to me. Except I wouldn't get free. I'd just keep feeling the way I've been feeling. And I'd love to have a sponsor that would say, you don't need to make amends, you'll never find. I heard a guy not too long ago, he said, making amends and ever finishing them would be like taking a feather pillow to the top of the Empire State Building and throwing those feathers out into the world and trying to find each and every one of them. He said, you'll never be able to make amends. And I know 300 or 400 people around this country, and several in my home group, that have finished every one of the amends they're consciously aware of. And people around this country that have done that 20, 30, and 40 times through this work, because they don't come from the school that says 1 through 9 once, because nowhere in the AA literature does it says you work the first 9 steps once. And if you know where it's written that way, please show me. So I don't do it. I go through the first 9 steps on a regular basis. I live the best I can in 10, 11, and 12, and I've gotten to the point where I'm wondering if those people that say you do 1 through 9 once ever have. Because if you ever had the revolutionary change that it brings in your life, you wouldn't want to miss when it gets a little stale. You wouldn't want to miss it again when you're 7 years sober and you're taking the credit for what you've been given. You wouldn't want to miss it 8 years sober when she's gone and everything's a shambles and everything's flat and you can't meditate or pray and working with others is boring and you're speaking all over the country and it just isn't exciting anymore. And you do it all again and you get that excitement back and you get that connection back and meditation is flowing and your prayer life's happening and working with others is exciting and you love the way you're living and where you're going and who you're with. And then a year later, and you want to know who wrote about it? Another non-alcoholic, damn it. Harry Tiebolt, Dr. Silkworth, Carl Jung, all non-alcoholic, gave us the... I love when I hear somebody put down medicine, psychiatry, or religion, failing to realize the entire program comes from men of medicine, science, and religion. Mostly non-alcoholics. But it happens right here between you and I, one alcoholic talking with another alcoholic. But you want to read who knew more about that than a lot of us is Harry Tiebolt, who knew about reconstruction of the ego after having a spiritual awakening. My great-great-grand sponsor, 49 years doing this work, Paul Martin in Chicago, still alive, 49 years doing this work on a regular basis. He is the healthiest, most alive 70-year-old man I've ever met in my life. They do 4th and 5th steps 5, 6, 7 times a year just to have that in their group and that kind of confession and that kind of closeness and that kind of... My grand sponsor with 26 years flew there to Chicago when he was having some trouble at 26 years and reviewed 1, 2, and 3, flew back to Indianapolis, wrote inventory, flew back to Chicago, Paul Martin put him up in a motel for the weekend, they sent 9 people by his room, strangers, to hear a fist step. Because the big book talks about the right person or persons. And they take that literally. And they do multiple fist steps, because if you ever think there's only, I woke up 7 years sober with an inventory, and my ego said, there's only one man in the world that can hear that inventory, and that's your sponsor. The next thought was, and if something happens to him, you're a dead duck, and if you don't let some people here in Los Angeles get to know you now that you've been here several years, you're a dead duck. And I started fist stepping with more than one person each time to let people know me on that level. And my great-grand sponsor flew home after that fist step with 9 different people, sat down with his wife, saw some amends he'd never seen in 26 years, some financial stuff. They talked about it, he and his wife. They sold the house. They moved into a teeny trailer. They paid off some of those amends, and he was more free than the 10 years I'd known him. You see, I think there came a time for me in Alcoholics Anonymous where I was more interested in getting free than being right. And I was more interested in being free than just relief. And there's a lot you can do in AA for relief, and believe me, when you're new, you need some, because you haven't had any for a long time. But when you've been here for a while and you found out the secret to relief, that it's always temporary, and you need some real freedom, and you got this stuff inside you that's been there since your earliest memory for a father who was 67 years old by the time you were 10, and you've banged on chairs for 12 years, and you've screamed about it, and you've yelled about it, and you've tried everything in the world you possibly can, and you've shared in 500 meetings, and you've called 2,000 alcoholics, and when you think of them, those feelings are still there. You cannot look at his picture. You can't go to his grave for 9 years. You don't even like mentioning the man because of how you feel. And you take some action that makes no intellectual sense, because the spiritual life is not a theory, and it makes no sense to me to this day up here in my mind. And you put down everything that you did that caused him harm, after putting everything he did that made you mad. And in that 4th column of the resentment inventory, where you're asked to take responsibility, you see where your selfishness and your self-seeking and your dishonesty, all rooted in fear, where you were playing God way before you ever took a drink, because at 10 years old, you knew better than God how he should be, how old he should have been, how he should have been doing it, and where he should have been doing it, better than God did. You had a better plan than God. I was asked a question one time that makes me realize how I play God, and this man said to me, "Joe, if you would have really had something to do with your own creation, wouldn't you have done a better job?" And I get to see where a 10-year-old kid was playing God 3 years before he ever took a drink. And then admit that to another alcoholic. Ask for that stuff to be removed. Get past the idea that's perpetuated in AA that you can't make amends to someone who's dead. And go for some real freedom, because I'll tell you, that day I wanted that freedom, 3/4 of the people in that room said, "Can't make amends to someone who's dead. Can't do that." And you know what? You know what's really being said in these rooms when somebody says you can't, or your own mind says you can't? You know what's really being expressed? Agnosticism. And you know what they're really saying? God isn't everything. But thank God the other quarter of that room said, "Sure you can, son. Go for it. We know your sponsor. When you get to the 9th step, do what he says. And you can get free, because you can make amends to someone who's dead, and you can finish them all. Even the ones you can't find, the book will tell you right what to do. And I got to go to his grave and read a letter that I had written saying nothing but what I needed to say about what I thought I did that hurt him, and walk out of that grave free of feelings that have not come back to this day, 11 years later. And I have his picture on my mantle, and I can go to his grave whenever I'm home, and I can talk about him, and my feelings change from like hate to respect to admiration. He was a really neat guy that I could have gotten a whole lot from. So if you have those people in your life that are still alive and you haven't made the amends, make them before they go. Don't miss the opportunity to get free face to face. But if they are gone, go to their grave. Experience the 9th step. It's not meant to be talked about. It's meant to be lived. They're meant to be made. And then you can find out about 10 and 11, what they're really about. because there's so much more than the short form they're written, and there's so much more to meditation than listening, and there's so much more to prayer than talking. But you'll find very little in Alcoholics Anonymous with the 10th and 11th step, and a lot with 12. It's a great place to find out about the 12th step, but don't try to find out about prayer and meditation in Alcoholics Anonymous. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous you will, but you'll meet people that will laugh at you for meditating and think you're silly for praying and tell you about all there is to meditate. I don't like admitting this, but it's what I found when I searched around. And once in a while here and there you'll find men and women that have been doing it for years and years and years, and they're just a wealth of spiritual information of what you can do with this program if you choose to get free rather than settle for relief. Thanks for asking me to come.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.